Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. Joseph Heller's Catch 22, first published in 1961, is one of the most influential satirical novels of the 20th century. Set during World War II, the novel follows the experiences of Captain John Yossarian, a U.S. Army Air Force bombardier stationed on the small Italian island of Pinosa. However, Catch 22 is far from a traditional war novel. Rather than glorifying heroism or battlefield courage, it dismantles the very logic of war and bureaucracy, revealing their inherent absurdity and the way they trap individuals in inescapable cycles of madness. At its core, Catch 22 is an anti-war novel, but it is also a scathing critique of institutional power, capitalism, and the human tendency to justify senseless suffering. Heller, who served as a bombardier in World War II, drew from his own experiences, but he transformed them into something surreal and nightmarish. The novel is non-linear, jumping between different time periods and perspectives, making it disorienting, just like the war itself. Events are often repeated from different angles, with contradictions and inconsistencies that highlight the insanity of the world Heller portrays. The novel's most famous concept, Catch 22, has become a widely used term in the English language, describing a no-win situation where contradictory rules prevent escape. In the book, Catch 22 is a bureaucratic rule that states a soldier can request to be removed from combat duty if he is insane. But if he makes that request, it proves he is sane enough to continue flying dangerous missions. This paradox traps Yossarian and his fellow soldiers in a system where logic is twisted against them at every turn. Upon its release, Catch 22 was met with mixed reviews, with some critics finding its chaotic structure difficult to follow. However, over time, it gained a massive following, particularly among Vietnam War-era readers who saw in it a reflection of their own disillusionment with authority and war. It became a defining book for a generation, influencing countless writers, filmmakers, and political thinkers. Today, it remains one of the most widely studied and quoted works in literature, a novel that continues to speak to the absurdities of modern life. With this background in mind, we now dive into the story itself, beginning with Yossarian's struggle to stay alive in a world that refuses to make sense. It all begins with Yossarian, a U.S. Army Air Force bombardier, sitting in a hospital on the small Italian island of Pinosa, faking an illness. He isn't sick, at least, not physically. But the war has stretched his nerves to their breaking point, and this hospital is one of the few places where he feels safe. Every mission he flies brings him closer to death, and Yossarian has realized something terrifying. The people in charge don't care whether he lives or dies. From his hospital bed, he censors letters for the enlisted men, It's a mindless task, a distraction from the war outside. And sometimes, for fun, he signs the letters as Washington Irving or Irving Washington. The army hasn't caught on yet. Around him, other soldiers lie in their beds, some actually ill, others like him, simply seeking an escape. Across the room, a man named Dunbar, one of Yossarian's few friends, tries to make time slow down by doing things he hates because, logically, the more miserable he is, the longer life will seem. The hospital has its share of absurdities. There's a soldier in white, completely bandaged, fed and cleaned through tubes. No one knows if he's alive or dead. And then there's the chaplain, a timid and nervous man who seems out of place in the military. The chaplain finds Yossarian unsettling, but is also drawn to his sincerity. Yossarian, unlike most men, doesn't hide the fact that he is afraid. But eventually, Yossarian's sanctuary in the hospital comes to an end, and he is sent back to his squadron. Here, the real insanity begins. The squadron is under the command of Colonel Cathcart, a man obsessed with getting promotions and recognition. He believes that by increasing the number of combat missions his men must fly, he will impress his superiors. So, every time Yossarian gets close to completing his required missions and going home, Cathcart raises the number again. This is where Catch 22 takes hold of him. According to Army regulations, a soldier who is insane can be removed from combat duty. However, if a soldier wants to avoid combat, that means he values his life and is therefore sane. If he is sane, he must continue flying missions. If he doesn't ask to be grounded, he is insane. But then, he can't be removed from combat because he hasn't asked. It's a paradox, a trap with no escape. And Yossarian realizes that no matter what he does, he is doomed to stay in this war. The absurdity of the situation is everywhere. Major, his real name, the result of a cruel joke from his father, is the squadron's executive officer. He was promoted to major by accident and is so overwhelmed by his position that he refuses to see anyone in his office unless they come when he isn't there. There's Doc Danica, the squadron's flight surgeon, who refuses to help Yossarian get out of flying. He tells him about Catch 22 and shrugs, as if to say, that's just how things are. And then there's Milo Minderbinder, the mess officer, who takes capitalism to its most extreme conclusion. Milo doesn't care about the war, he cares about business. He starts an elaborate black market syndicate, trading with both friend and enemy, making deals that only benefit himself. He is so persuasive, so full of patriotic rhetoric, that no one questions why the squadron is eating bad food while he grows richer by the day. Yossarian's frustration grows. Every mission feels like a death sentence, and the war is becoming more meaningless with each passing day. The men around him are being killed in absurd, senseless ways. A gunner named Snowden dies in his arms, his insides spilling out despite Yossarian's desperate attempts to save him. Another pilot, McWatt, playfully flies his plane too low, only to accidentally kill a fellow soldier before deliberately crashing into a mountain out of guilt. No one questions any of this. No one asks why they are still flying missions long after victory seems assured. The military keeps moving forward, grinding up soldiers and spitting them out, driven by bureaucracy and ambition. Yossarian's only goal is survival. He begins looking for ways to escape, any way at all. He contemplates desertion, fakes illnesses, and even starts walking around naked as a form of silent protest. But no one cares. No matter what he does, the war machine keeps turning. And through it all, Catch 22 looms over him, an invisible force that traps him in a system designed to keep him fighting. The more he struggles against it, the tighter it squeezes around him. For Yossarian, there is only one question that matters. How do you stay alive when the world around you has gone mad? Yossarian returns to duty with a growing sense of despair. The missions continue. The war stretches endlessly ahead, and his paranoia tightens its grip. He has no illusions about heroism or honor. He knows that every time he climbs into a B-25 bomber, he is gambling with his life, and the odds are getting worse. The sky over Italy is a death trap. The flak from enemy anti-aircraft guns is getting heavier, more precise, more relentless. He sits in the tight bombardier's compartment, knees pressed against cold metal, feeling utterly exposed as black bursts of shrapnel explode all around him. Each mission could be his last. And yet, he is expected to go up again and again, while Colonel Cathcart, safe on the ground, continues to raise the number of required missions without a second thought. Yossarian watches as the other men in his squadron cope with the madness in their own ways. Some pretend it doesn't exist, throwing themselves into routine, convincing themselves that if they follow orders without question, they will somehow survive. Others descend into a quiet, dead-eyed resignation, accepting that their fate is out of their hands. And then there are those who, like Yossarian, see the absurdity of it all, but find themselves powerless to escape it. One of these men is Chief White Half-Oat, a half-Native American officer who takes pride in the fact that every time his family settled somewhere, oil was discovered, and they were promptly forced to leave. He treats this as a joke, but there is bitterness beneath his laughter. He understands displacement, the way power uproots the powerless without concern. He tells Yossarian that he plans to die of pneumonia, as if choosing his own death is the only agency he has left. Then there's Captain Black, who thrives on manipulation. He is an opportunist, using paranoia as a weapon to keep the men in line. He launches the glorious loyalty oath crusade, forcing everyone to sign repeated oaths of allegiance, proving their patriotism again and again in a pointless, bureaucratic exercise. It serves no purpose except to feed Captain Black's sense of power, but it works. The men line up, recite their oaths, and sign their names, because to refuse is to invite suspicion, to to mark oneself as an enemy. Yossarian, of course, sees through it immediately. He refuses to participate, earning himself the wrath of Captain Black, who delights in punishing him by restricting access to food and supplies. Meanwhile, life in the squadron continues its surreal march forward. Milo Minderbinder, now running his ever-expanding syndicate, has made himself into a businessman first, a soldier second, and a patriot never. He has figured out how to profit from both sides of the war, making deals with the Germans, selling supplies meant for his own squadron, and even orchestrating missions where American planes bomb their own bases because, in his words, it's good for the syndicate, and everybody has a share. No one seems to know how he has managed to do all this while maintaining his position in the military. But then again, in Catch-22, logic is not a requirement for power. Yossarian, exhausted and disillusioned, finds a strange sort of solace in his conversations with the chaplain, Captain Tapman. The chaplain is one of the few men Yossarian respects, timid, kind-hearted, and utterly unsuited for the war. He lacks the bluster and self-importance of the other officers, and he is genuinely troubled by the suffering he sees around him. But he is also weak, too afraid to challenge authority. He wants to believe in the goodness of the system, but deep down, he knows it is broken. His faith is cracking under the weight of war. The missions continue, and Yossarian's dread deepens. He becomes increasingly aware of how meaningless the war has become, not just in an abstract sense, but in a painfully tangible way. The Allies are already winning. The Germans are retreating. Victory is inevitable. And yet, the missions don't stop. The higher-ups are not interested in ending the war as soon as possible. They are interested in maintaining control, in protecting their own careers. If a few more men die in the process, so be it. And men are dying. Kid Sampson is killed in a freak accident when McWatt, one of the squadron's pilots, flies too low over the beach as a joke. His propellers slice Kid Sampson in half before the horrified eyes of the other soldiers. McWatt, realizing what he has done, doesn't wait for punishment. Instead, he takes his plane up into the sky and crashes it into a mountainside. 2 men dead, just like that. Not from combat, not from enemy fire, just from the senselessness of it all. Each death chips away at Yossarian's resolve. He begins to see the war as a living entity, something vast and inescapable, something that consumes men and spits out their remains. He remembers Snowden, the young gunner who died in his arms, his intestines spilling out onto the floor of the plane. That moment has never left him. He still hears Snowden's voice, still feels the warmth of his blood on his hands. He tries to forget, but he can't. It is at this point that Yossarian makes a decision. He is done playing by the rules. If the system is going to trap him in an endless loop of missions, if Colonel Cathcart is going to keep raising the requirements, if Catch-22 is going to ensure that there is no legal way out, then Yossarian will have to find another way. He will lie. He will cheat. He will do whatever it takes to survive. He begins to take more drastic measures. He fakes illnesses, exaggerates injuries, and even walks around the base naked, hoping to be declared unfit for duty. But nothing works. The officers either ignore him or chalk it up to battle fatigue. He is still being sent on missions, still climbing into that bombardier seat, still staring out at the flak-filled sky and waiting for the explosion that will finally end it all. And through it all, Catch 22 looms over him, the invisible force that ensures he cannot escape. Every argument he makes, every attempt at logic, is met with a contradiction that keeps him trapped. The rule is designed to be unbreakable, not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't make sense. It is a weaponized paradox, a bureaucratic prison with no doors. Yossarian is left standing at the edge of madness. He knows he cannot keep going like this, but he also knows that the war will not end for him, not unless he finds a way to break free. The question is no longer whether he can survive the missions. The question is whether he can survive the system itself. Yossarian's paranoia grows sharper with each passing day, but the madness around him only seems to intensify. The war does not merely kill men, it reshapes them, bends them to its illogical demands, and erodes their grip on reality. Yossarian clings to the certainty of his own fear, convinced that it is the only rational response to an insane situation. The system is rigged against him, and every new development only reinforces that belief. One morning, he wakes up to discover that Doc Danica has been pronounced dead. The irony is that Doc Danica is very much alive, but due to bureaucratic oversight, the system insists otherwise, because he was listed as being aboard McWatt's plane when it crashed. The military records have already processed his death. No amount of protesting on Doc Danica's part can undo the mistake. According to official paperwork, he does not exist. And if the records say he is dead, then as far as the military is concerned, he is dead. His wife back home receives his benefits. Friends speak of him in the past tense, and the absurdity of the situation sinks in. Reality does not matter. Only the bureaucracy does. Yossarian watches all of this unfold with grim understanding. If a man can be declared dead while still breathing, then what does it mean to be alive at all? The system does not recognize individual existence, only paperwork, only rules. It is no longer just enemy bombs or faulty machinery that threaten him. It is an uncaring, faceless process that swallows men whole and refuses to acknowledge its mistakes. Meanwhile, the missions continue. The tension among the men is palpable. They are exhausted, disillusioned, and increasingly aware that no amount of bravery or sacrifice will ever be enough. Colonel Cathcart's obsession with pleasing his superiors ensures that the mission count will never stop increasing, and the men are losing their will to fight. Some turn to humor as a shield, like the ever-cynical Nately, whose optimism is so relentless that it borders on delusion. Others, like Hungry Joe, slip further into their own private neuroses, suffering from night terrors and an increasing detachment from reality. Milo Minderbinder's war profiteering, meanwhile, has reached new heights. His syndicate has grown so powerful that he is no longer bound by traditional allegiances. He does not fight for America, nor for the Axis. He fights for profit. His latest scheme involves cornering the market on Egyptian cotton, a venture that quickly goes south when he finds himself unable to sell it. Undeterred, he begins devising new ways to make his failing investment lucrative, his mind working not toward any sense of morality or duty, but toward economic efficiency. The war itself has become nothing more than a vast marketplace to him, and he maneuvers within it with the confidence of a man who knows that in capitalism, even catastrophe can be monetized. The idea of war as an industry disgusts Yossarian, but he also sees its truth. Men are dying, but others are growing rich. The generals, the bureaucrats, the businessmen, they are all removed from the suffering, operating at a level where war is nothing more than strategy and supply chains. The idea that it is being fought for any grand moral purpose is a lie, and Yossarian sees no reason to keep pretending otherwise. His refusal to play along makes him a target. He is no longer just a soldier, he is a problem. He no longer fits within the neat structure of military obedience. He begins openly questioning orders, challenging authority, and making no secret of his desire to escape the war altogether. His actions do not go unnoticed. Yossarian's increasing defiance comes to a head when he is assigned a particularly dangerous mission over Bologna. The very name of the city fills the squadron with dread. The enemy defenses are fierce, the casualties high. Men whisper about it in hushed tones, convinced that flying over Bologna is as good as a death sentence. Yossarian, already teetering on the edge of desertion, makes a desperate attempt to sabotage the mission. The night before they are scheduled to take off, he sneaks into the operations tent and moves the bomb line on the map, making it appear as though Bologna has already been captured. His hope is that, by doing so, the mission will be called off. For a brief, glorious moment, it seems to work. The officers believe the false report and ground the planes. The men celebrate, relieved that they have been spared. But reality catches up quickly, and once the deception is uncovered, the mission is reinstated. Yossarian has no choice but to fly. As the formation approaches Bologna, his fear is suffocating. The sky is thick with anti-aircraft fire, and the roar of engines and explosions fills his ears. He grips the controls in a panic, heart pounding as enemy shells explode around him. He watches planes go down, men vanish in bursts of flame and smoke, and he knows that death is inches away. Somehow he survives. The mission is completed, but not without loss. Yossarian lands in a daze, covered in sweat, feeling as though he has been granted a temporary reprieve by some cruel, unseen force. He stumbles out of the plane, numb to the cheers, and slaps on the back. all he can think about is that it will never end. No matter how many times he survives, there will always be another mission, another Bologna. He realizes something else. His attempts to cheat death are growing increasingly desperate, moving the bomb line, faking illness, hiding from duty. None of it has worked. The war keeps pulling him back in, and every trick he plays only delays the inevitable. He is a rat in a maze with no exit, a puppet dangling on invisible strings. Desperation turns into rage. He storms into the officers' quarters, furious at Colonel Cathcart, furious at the system, furious at the entire war machine. He demands to know how many more missions he will have to fly before he is sent home. The answer, of course, is always the same: more. There is no magic number, no finish line. The goalposts will keep moving until he dies or finds a way out. Yossarian storms away, but the encounter leaves him shaken. For the first time, he begins to entertain thoughts of escape in a more serious way. Desertion, exile, even faking his own death, anything to remove himself from the war. He no longer cares about duty, about what others think of him. The only thing that matters is survival. The war, however, does not allow easy exits. Every avenue is blocked, every loophole closed by yet another contradiction, another bureaucratic wall. And looming over it all is the ever-present, ever-deadly catch-22. It is not just a rule, it is the structure of the entire system. It is the invisible force that ensures no one can ever break free, no matter how hard they try. And Yossarian is beginning to realize that if he does not find a way out soon, it will kill him. Yossarian is unraveling. The war has become an unbearable weight pressing down on him, suffocating him with its absurdity and cruelty. He has survived countless missions by sheer luck, but that luck cannot last forever. Every time he steps onto a plane, he feels it slipping away, the odds stacking higher against him, the realization that he is trapped, bound by rules that defy reason, commanded by officers who see him as nothing more than a number, drives him closer to the edge. The squadron is no better off. The men are either numb to the horror around them, or frantically trying to claw their way out, each in their own way. Hungry Joe, tormented by nightmares, continues his spiral into insanity. Nately remains hopelessly in love with the indifferent prostitute in Rome, believing that if he can just convince her of his devotion, he can make sense of his life. Captain Black still clings to his petty power games, delighting in making others miserable. And all the while, Milo Minderbinder's syndicate thrives, expanding its reach into every corner of the war. Milo has turned corruption into an art form. His latest scheme is perhaps his most audacious yet. He has struck a deal with the Germans to bomb his own squadron. The logic, if it can be called that, is simple. It's good for business. The syndicate profits, and since everybody has a share, he argues that no one should complain. The fact that he is aiding the enemy, that he is actively killing his own men, is irrelevant. Profit is the only guiding principle, and in Milo's world, attempts to accommodate capitalism. When confronted about the absurdity of his actions, Milo simply shrugs. If the war itself can be reduced to transactions, then why should loyalty or patriotism matter? The bombing of Pianosa by their own planes shakes Yossarian to his core. He watches in disbelief as American pilots, following orders from Milo's organization, drop explosives on their own airfield. Buildings crumble, men scream, and the reality of the war's meaninglessness becomes undeniable. No one is safe, not from the enemy, not from their own side, and certainly not from the bureaucrats and profiteers pulling the strings. After the bombing, Milo miraculously avoids punishment. He manages to justify his actions to the higher-ups, arguing that the attack was necessary for the greater economic good. Astonishingly, instead of being court-martialed, he is praised. His syndicate is celebrated as a model of efficiency, proof that capitalism can thrive even in wartime. Yossarian is astounded, but no longer surprised. He has seen too much to expect justice. Meanwhile, the war takes an even more personal toll on him. The deaths continue, each one a reminder that he is not immune. Kid Sampson is gone, McWatt is gone, and then, the final blow, Nately is killed. Nately's death is particularly devastating, not just because he was young, not just because he had an almost childlike belief in goodness, but because it is so utterly pointless. He dies shortly after finally convincing his prostitute to love him. For all his optimism, for all his faith that something beautiful could come out of the madness, he is taken away in an instant. Yossarian cannot accept it. He storms through Rome, filled with rage and sorrow, determined to find Nately's girl and deliver the news. What he finds in Rome is worse than he imagined. The city has become a nightmare. The chaos of war has transformed it into a hellscape, where violence and cruelty reign unchecked. The streets are filled with the broken and the lost, orphans scavenging for food, soldiers preying on the weak, authorities either absent or complicit in the suffering. Yossarian moves through the streets in a daze, searching for Nately's girl, but instead, he finds horrors that confirm everything he has come to believe about the world. He witnesses a young girl being beaten by soldiers, her cries lost in the noise of the city. He sees an old man laughing bitterly at the destruction around him, telling Yossarian that morality is an illusion, that survival is the only law worth following. He realizes that war has not just made men into killers. It has stripped them of everything human. Then, the final betrayal. Yossarian is ambushed and stabbed in the side by Nately's girl. In his grief-fueled pursuit, he had failed to consider that she might blame him for Nately's death, that her love for the boy might turn into hatred for the man who had brought her the news. The pain is immediate, searing, but even as he collapses onto the street, it is nothing compared to the weight of everything else he has witnessed. He wakes up in a hospital, dazed but alive. His body may have survived, but his spirit is fractured. The war has broken him in ways he does not yet fully understand. As he lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, he knows one thing with certainty: he cannot keep doing this. He cannot fly another mission. He cannot pretend that this war is anything but a machine designed to consume lives without reason or mercy. He has to get out, but there is no easy escape. The officers are watching him more closely now. His defiance has made him a liability. Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Corn call him in, offering him a deal, one that at first seems like an escape, but is, in reality, another trap. If he agrees to support them, to publicly endorse their leadership, and say that he is satisfied with the war effort, they will send him home. It is a tempting offer. All he has to do is lie, to sell out his principles and go free. Yossarian considers it. He is tired. He is broken. He wants nothing more than to walk away from all of this. But deep down, he knows that accepting the deal means surrendering to the very system that has tormented him. It means validating the absurdity, the corruption, the meaningless death. It means betraying the men who have died, the men who are still trapped. For the first time, he realizes that there is another option, a dangerous one, an uncertain one, but an option nonetheless. He does not have to play by their rules. He does not have to negotiate. He can run. He does not say yes to Cathcart and Corn. He does not say no, either. He simply lets the possibility of escape settle in his mind, feeling something he has not felt in a long time. Hope. Yossarian lies in his hospital bed, his body weak from the stab wound, and his mind restless with the weight of his decision. The war has reduced everything to a grim joke, where survival depends on absurd technicalities, and authority figures twist logic to serve their own ends. He knows now that no one is coming to save him. No superior officer will see reason. No bureaucratic loophole will offer him a way out. If he wants to live, he will have to take matters into his own hands. But before he can act, he must recover, and the hospital proves to be its own kind of prison. Here, men fake illnesses to avoid combat. Doctors administer useless treatments, and patients are shuffled in and out like statistics on a report. The absurdity of war does not stop at the battlefield. It seeps into every corner of military life. The soldiers around him are either pretending to be sick to avoid duty or actually sick, but being ignored by the indifferent medical staff. Yossarian watches it all with weary amusement, but underneath, his desperation grows. Every day spent here is another day closer to being sent back to combat. The hospital's greatest absurdity is the case of the soldier in white, a man entirely encased in bandages, with only 2 small holes left open for his eyes. He is immobile, silent, and completely at the mercy of the hospital staff, who change his Roman IV bags without knowing if he is alive or dead. The soldier in white becomes a symbol to Yossarian proof that in this war, a man can be reduced to nothing more than an anonymous, voiceless thing, forgotten and discarded. It terrifies him. He will not end up like that. But the military machine is relentless. Soon enough, he is deemed fit to return to duty, his wound no longer an excuse to stay in the hospital. As he is processed for release, he is struck by the cold efficiency of it all. His suffering is irrelevant. His desires are irrelevant. All that matters is that he is put back into rotation. One more body in the endless cycle of missions. Back at the airbase, the atmosphere has changed. Nately's death has cast a shadow over the squadron, but the war moves forward, indifferent to grief. The remaining men carry on in various states of denial and resignation. Some drink more, some joke more, some withdraw into themselves. The only thing they all have in common is the knowledge that their fate is out of their hands. The officers, meanwhile, are tightening their grip. Colonel Cathcart, still desperate to impress his superiors, is pushing for more missions. His ambition is boundless, and his concern for the men non-existent. He increases the required number of flights once again, ensuring that no one will ever reach the end of their service. Yossarian's worst fears are confirmed. There is no final mission, no point at which he will be allowed to go home. The war will never end for him unless he finds his own way out. Faced with this grim reality, Yossarian begins openly resisting orders. He refuses to fly missions, invents illnesses, and avoids responsibility whenever possible. But each act of defiance brings consequences. The officers begin to see him not just as a coward, but as a problem. A soldier who questions the system is more dangerous than one who simply fears combat. His insubordination reaches its peak when he is ordered to fly another mission, and he simply does not go. He does not hide, does not make excuses. He just refuses. It is an act of rebellion so direct that it stuns those around him. Other men have tried to get out of flying, but few have done so with such blatant disregard for authority. His punishment is swift. He is confined, questioned, and threatened. The officers do not want to court-martial him. It would set a dangerous precedent, proving that a soldier can defy orders and survive. Instead, they offer him a deal. He can go home, free of further duty, if he agrees to publicly support their leadership. It is an insidious offer. It requires him to betray himself, to validate the very system that he despises. If he accepts, he will be safe, but at the cost of everything he believes in. If he refuses, he will be thrown back into the war, where death is all but certain. He is paralyzed by the choice. The easy answer is to say yes, to sign the papers and walk away. But he cannot ignore the voices of the men who have died, Nately, McWatt, Kid Sampson, and all the others who had no choice. If he accepts the deal, he will be complicit in the machine that consumed them. He will be part of the lie. For the first time, he realizes the true nature of Catch-22. It is not just a rule. It is the very foundation of the war itself. It is the logic that keeps men trapped, the endless loop that ensures no one can ever escape. If he agrees to the deal, he will be acknowledging its power. If he refuses, he will suffer its consequences. But then, an idea forms, one so simple and radical almost seems absurd. He does not have to accept their terms. He does not have to argue or fight or play their game. He can do something else entirely. He can run. He does not say yes. He does not say no. He simply stands, walks out of the office, and keeps walking. Past the airfield, past the barracks, past everything that has kept him bound to this nightmare. He does not know exactly where he is going, only that he must keep moving. Because in a world governed by Catch-22, the only way to win is to refuse to play. Yossarian walks away from the airbase with no real plan, only the burning certainty that he cannot stay. Every step he takes is an act of defiance, a declaration that he will not be another nameless casualty in a war that makes no sense. But escaping is easier in theory than in practice. The military machine is vast, and he is just one man. He knows that sooner or later they will come looking for him. As he moves through the camp, he sees familiar faces, men who once fought alongside him, now too numb or afraid to resist. Some look at him with admiration, others with fear, as if his disobedience might be contagious. But no one stops him. Perhaps they, too, understand what he is doing. Perhaps, deep down, they wish they had the courage to do the same. Yossarian's first instinct is to flee to Rome. The city, chaotic and unpredictable, seems like the only place where he might blend in, where he might find some kind of sanctuary. But when he arrives, he finds that Rome is no longer the city he once knew. The war has consumed it. He walks the streets, searching for something. He does not even know what. Nately's prostitute is gone, vanished into the ruins. The brothels and bars where the soldiers once drank and laughed are now filled with desperate refugees, wounded men, and broken souls. The authorities have cracked down, sweeping the city clean of the people who once gave it life. And then the horrors begin. Yossarian stumbles into the back streets, where the war's cruelty is laid bare. He sees a young boy, no older than 10, crying as a soldier drags his mother away. He watches as a woman is beaten by military police, her crime unknown and irrelevant. The war has turned Rome into a nightmare, a place where suffering has no meaning and violence has no reason. Then, the most sickening sight of all, Arfi, sitting in a ruined apartment, casually smoking a cigar. Arfi, the bumbling navigator, the man who seemed too stupid to understand the war, grins at Yossarian as if nothing is wrong. And then he says it, so casually that Yossarian thinks he must have misheard. "I raped her," Arfi says, "and then I threw her out the window." The words hit Yossarian like a physical blow. He looks around the room, expecting to see anyone reacting, stopping Arfi, punishing him. But there is nothing. No alarm, no outrage. Arfi is calm, unbothered, as if he has done nothing unusual. Yossarian can barely breathe. He wants to scream, to hit Arfi, to make him understand the horror of what he has done. But Arfi does not care. He simply laughs. "You can't touch me," he says. "They don't arrest officers." And he is right. Moments later, military police arrive, Yossarian braces himself, certain that they have come for Arfi, but instead they turn to him. They are here for him, for going AWOL. Yossarian watches in stunned disbelief as Arfi is left untouched. The war has no concern for real crimes. Murder, rape, betrayal, none of it matters. The only crime is disobedience, and Yossarian has disobeyed. They drag him away, and he does not resist. He has seen all he needs to see. The war is not just absurd, it is evil. It is a machine designed to strip men of their humanity, to make them complicit in its endless cycle of destruction. Back at the base, he is given one last chance. Colonel Korn and Colonel Cathcart, ever eager to protect their own reputations, once again offer him the deal. He can go home, no punishment, no further missions, if he simply agrees to endorse their leadership, to pretend that everything is fine. Yossarian listens. He considers. He understands now, more than ever, that the system is rigged, that there is no justice, no fairness. The easiest thing to do would be to accept, to go home, to let it all go. But he cannot. He has seen too much. And so, once again, he does the only thing that makes sense. He runs. Yossarian does not hesitate this time. He runs. Out of the colonel's office, past the officers who would have him sign away his dignity, past the airmen resigned to their fates. He runs as though the entire weight of the war is behind him, pressing down, demanding his submission. But he does not stop. He cannot. If he stops, he will be trapped again, forced back into the machine that chews men up and spits them out as empty shells. But running away from a war is not simple. The military has its reach everywhere, and his face is well known among the officers. He knows he must be careful, knows that he must think ahead. Rome is no longer an option. The city is occupied, watched, crawling with men just like the ones who arrested him for defying orders while letting real criminals walk free. If he is to truly escape, he will have to go somewhere beyond their reach. Switzerland. The idea forms in his mind like a revelation. It is neutral, far from the madness of the war, a place where a man might be able to disappear. Or made it there, Yossarian is sure of it. His ridiculous plan, his suspiciously frequent plane crashes, or had been planning his escape all along, playing the fool while quietly working toward freedom. Yossarian had mocked him, had thought him an idiot. But now he sees the truth. Or was the only one who figured it out, and if Orr could do it, then so could he. But first, he must get out of the base without being caught. Slipping through the camp is easier than he expects. It is night, and most men are asleep or too exhausted to care about a lone figure moving through the darkness. He moves carefully, avoiding the well-lit paths, ducking behind barracks, listening for the distant voices of patrols. Every step is calculated, every movement precise. He is no longer an officer, no longer a soldier. He is a fugitive. His first real challenge comes at the airstrip. He considers stealing a plane, flying himself out. But he quickly realizes how foolish that would be. He is no pilot, and And even if he were, the moment he took off, he would be an easy target. No, he needs another way. Then he remembers the supply trucks. Every day, vehicles come in and out of the base, bringing in food, ammunition, supplies, everything the army needs to keep the war running. If he can sneak onto one of those trucks, he might be able to make it far enough away to disappear. He waits in the shadows, heart pounding, as a truck rolls to a stop near one of the storage buildings. The driver, a tired-looking corporal, steps out, lighting a cigarette, stretching his arms. Yossarian seizes the opportunity, slipping onto the back of the truck, ducking behind crates, curling himself into the smallest shape possible. The weight is unbearable. Minutes feel like hours. Every sound is a potential threat. Every movement a sign that he has been discovered. But then, the truck rumbles to life. The engine groans, the tires roll forward, and Yossarian feels himself being carried away from the base, away from the war, away from everything that has held him prisoner. He does not know how far the truck will take him. He does not know what dangers lie ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he feels something close to hope. He is not free yet, but he is closer than he has ever been. Yossarian crouches in the back of the supply truck, his body wedged between wooden crates as the vehicle bumps along uneven roads. Every jolt sends pain through his still healing stab wound, but he grits his teeth and stays silent. He does not know where the truck is heading, only that it is taking him further from Pianosa, further from the airbase, further from the madness of the war. But he is still deep in enemy territory. His own army is the enemy now, and if they catch him, there will be no second chances. The truck rumbles on through the night. The air is thick with the distant sounds of war, planes overhead, distant explosions, the occasional burst of gunfire from unseen battles. Yossarian grips the sides of the crate, his breath shallow. The war is everywhere. There is no escaping it entirely, but he must get far enough away that he no longer belongs to it. After what feels like hours, the truck lurches to a stop. Yossarian freezes. He hears voices, Italian, not English. That's good. He slowly peeks through the gaps between the crates, careful not to be seen. A group of men stands near the truck, talking, gesturing, unloading supplies. He does not recognize them, but that means little. In this war, alliances shift like the wind. He waits, watching, listening. Then he sees an opportunity. One of the men, a thin, wiry figure with a dark cap, moves away from the others, stepping toward the side of the truck. If Yossarian times it right, he can slip out and vanish before anyone notices. He does not hesitate. He moves quickly, dropping from the truck's edge and into the shadows before anyone can react. His legs ache from the long ride, but he forces himself to keep moving, walking briskly, but without drawing attention. The last thing he needs is to appear like a man on the run. He pulls his officer's jacket tighter around him, suddenly aware that it is a liability. If he looks too much like an American soldier, someone might turn him in. The streets are unfamiliar, narrow and winding, lined with old buildings scarred by the war. He is somewhere in Italy, that much he knows, but where exactly is uncertain. He needs a plan, a way to make it north to Switzerland, but for now, he just needs to keep moving. As he navigates the labyrinth of streets, His thoughts race. He has done the impossible. He has escaped the airbase. But he is not free yet. He is alone in a country still at war, with no resources, no allies, and no clear path forward. If he is caught, he will be dragged back, court-martialed or worse. And then, as he turns a corner, he sees something that makes his breath catch. A familiar face. An old woman sits on a doorstep, hunched over, her head wrapped in a scarf. It takes him a moment to recognize her. She worked in the whorehouse in Rome, one of the women who had always been there, background to the soldiers' revelry. But now she is alone, and the whorehouse is no more. He hesitates, then steps closer. "Signora," he says softly, his Italian clumsy but clear. She looks up, her eyes narrow, then widen in recognition. "Americano," she whispers. He nods. "I need help." For a long moment, she says nothing. Then she gestures for him to follow. He does not know if she will betray him, if she will lead him straight to the authorities, but he has no choice. He follows her inside, into the dimly lit interior of a broken home, and steps deeper into his uncertain future. Yossarian steps into the dimly lit room, his heart pounding. The old woman shuffles ahead of him, her steps slow and deliberate, as if weighed down by the weight of everything she has seen. The house is sparse, cracked walls, a wooden table with only one chair, a small bed pushed into the corner. It is not a home, not really. It is a place where someone exists, not where they live. She turns to him, her face unreadable. "Americano," she says again, softer this time. "You are running." He nods, unsure if he should explain more. The truth is dangerous. Words are dangerous. She sighs as if she has seen this before, and perhaps she has. The war has created many men like him, men with no country, no safety, no way forward except through fear and desperation. She gestures for him to sit. He does. "Where are you going?" she asks. "North," he says. "Switzerland." The woman shakes her head, clucking her tongue. "Long way, dangerous way." Yossarian knows this. He has no maps, no plan, no allies. Just the distant knowledge that Switzerland means safety. It is the only place where the war cannot reach him. The woman watches him for a long moment, then moves to the small stove in the corner. She pours water into a battered pot and sets it to boil. As they wait in silence, Yossarian listens to the distant sounds of the city, the occasional bark of a dog, the low murmur of voices in the streets, the ever-present hum of warplanes above. "You are not the first," the woman says finally. "Soldiers come, some American, some German, some Italian. They all say the same thing, I want to go, but not all of them make it." Yossarian swallows hard. He is not surprised, but hearing it said aloud makes the danger feel more real. "I need to try," he says. She nods slowly. Then, without another word, she walks to a small wooden chest near the bed. She opens it, rummages for a moment, then pulls out a bundle of old clothes. When she turns back to him, she holds up a tattered brown coat, worn but sturdy, and a cap. "Take these," she says. "You look too much like a soldier." Yossarian hesitates for only a second before stripping off his officer's jacket. The brown coat smells of dust and age, but when he pulls it on, he immediately feels less exposed. The cap is rough wool, slightly too small, but it will do. The old woman looks him over, nodding approvingly. "Better. Thank you," he says. He wants to ask her why she is helping him, why she is risking herself for a stranger. But he already knows the answer. The war has made them all strangers. It has taken away nations and names, turned people into ghosts passing through one another's lives. Maybe she is helping him because she once helped someone else, and they never made it. Maybe she is helping him because she hopes that if enough men escape, the war will finally lose. "Go now," she says, pointing toward the back door. Before morning, Yossarian stands. He does not know what to say. There are no words that feel sufficient, so instead he simply nods and walks toward the door. Before he steps out, she speaks again. "Stay off the main roads, avoid soldiers, and if someone stops you, say nothing. It is better to be thought a fool than a liar." He meets her gaze one last time, then slips into the night. The city is quieter now, though the war still lingers in the air like smoke. Yossarian moves through the narrow streets, keeping close to the shadows. He does not know exactly where he is going, only that he needs to head north. The roads leading out of the city will be watched, but if he can reach the countryside, he might have a chance. The first few hours are a blur of movement and fear. Every distant voice, every flicker of light in a window feels like a threat. But he presses on, keeping to side streets and alleyways. Twice he sees soldiers, and both times he ducks behind buildings, holding his breath until they pass. He makes his way to the edge of the city just before dawn. The buildings give way to open land, a mixture of fields and broken roads. He knows he must be careful now. Out in the open, there is nowhere to hide. But he also knows he cannot stop. Then, in the distance, he sees movement. A figure walking alone on the road ahead. Yossarian hesitates. He does not know if the person is a soldier, a traveler, or something worse. He could turn back, wait for them to pass. But something about the way they move, cautious, hurried, feels familiar. He steps forward, keeping his distance. "Hey," he calls softly. The figure stops, turns, and Yossarian's breath catches in his throat. It is someone he knows, someone he never expected to see again. The war has separated so many lives, but here, in the middle of nowhere, it has brought two lost souls together once more. The figure on the road hesitates, then steps forward, revealing a familiar face in the dim morning light. It is Chaplain Tapman. For a moment, Yossarian is frozen. He had assumed he would never see the chaplain again, that his escape from Pianosa had severed him from everyone he had known. And yet, here he is, worn, gaunt, his uniform replaced with civilian rags. But unmistakably, the same man who once doubted his own faith in a war where God seemed to have abandoned them all. "Yossarian," the chaplain whispers, as if afraid speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. Yossarian nods. "It's me." The chaplain's expression flickers between relief and disbelief. He glances around as if expecting soldiers to appear at any moment, then steps closer. Are you running?" "Yes." Yossarian does not see the point in lying. "And so are you." The chaplain lets out a short, tired laugh. "I suppose I am." He looks toward the road ahead. "I left. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't watch them send men to die while pretending it all made sense." He sighs. "And I suppose neither could you." Yossarian shakes his head. "No." For a moment, they stand in silence. Two men who had once been part of a senseless machine, now nothing more than fugitives on the same uncertain road. Then the chaplain speaks again, voice steady but soft. "Where are you going?" "Switzerland." A small, almost amused smile crosses the chaplain's face. "That seems to be the only place left for men like us." Yossarian exhales, shaking his head. "If I can make it." The chaplain glances around again, then nods. "Then let's make it." And just like that, they walk together. The journey is slow, cautious. They stay off the roads, moving through hills and valleys, avoiding towns and villages where soldiers might be stationed. The chaplain does not ask for details of Yossarian's escape, and Yossarian does not ask how the chaplain ended up here. Neither of them needs to know. The only thing that matters is the road ahead. At night, they sleep in abandoned barns, beneath trees, anywhere that offers shelter from the elements. They eat what little they can find, stale bread stolen from empty homes, fruit from overgrown orchards, water from streams. Hunger gnaws at them, exhaustion clings to their bones, but they keep moving. Yossarian begins to understand something he never did before. The war had always been something he was trapped in, something that controlled him. But now, as he moves through the quiet countryside, he sees that war is not just the bombs and bullets. It is the fear that lingers in people's eyes, the empty houses that once held families, the silence that comes when the world has been emptied of too many lives. Even as he flees, war follows, but he refuses to let it claim him. One night, as they sit near the banks of a narrow river, the chaplain speaks. "Do you ever wonder if we'll ever stop running?" Yossarian stares at the water, watching it move, always forward. "Maybe, maybe not," the chaplain exhales. "And if we do stop, what then?" Yossarian is silent for a long time before answering. "Then we live." The chaplain studies him for a moment, then nods. "Yes," he says quietly. "Then we live." Days pass, then a week. The road is long, but they are getting closer. One afternoon, as they trudge through a dense forest, they hear voices ahead. Yossarian tenses, pulling the chaplain down behind the cover of the trees. They listen, Italian, rough, unfamiliar. Soldiers, bandits, they do not know, but they do not wait to find out. They turn and move in the other direction, slipping through the trees like ghosts. Yossarian has learned to trust his instincts, and they tell him that danger is never far behind, but they press on. Then, one morning, they see it. Distant mountains, rising against the horizon. Switzerland. The sight is almost too much. They had spoken of it so often that it had begun to feel like a dream, something that existed only in words. But now, there it is, real, tangible, waiting. Yossarian feels something he has not felt in a long time: hope. They descend from the hills carefully, moving toward the border. They know it will not be easy. Guards patrol, checkpoints exist, but they are close, so close. As they approach, Yossarian turns to the chaplain. "This is it." The chaplain nods. He looks up at the mountains, then back at Yossarian. "We're almost free," Yossarian exhales. Almost. They step forward, and the war fades behind them. Joseph Heller's Catch-22 is not just a novel about war. It is a novel about survival, about resistance, about the absurdity of systems that value bureaucracy over human life. Through Yossarian's journey, Heller exposes the contradictions of war, the insanity of blind obedience, and the power of individual defiance. The novel resonated deeply when it was first published in 1961, particularly with those who had lived through World War II and those facing the looming specter of Vietnam. Its dark humor, satirical brilliance, and biting critique of authority made it one of the most influential anti-war novels of its time. But Catch-22 did more than critique war. It changed the way people talked about it. The term Catch-22 became a permanent part of the English language, used to describe no-win situations, illogical rules, and oppressive systems. It is a phrase that extends beyond the military, beyond war, into everyday life. For decades, readers have seen themselves in Yossarian not as soldiers, but as individuals caught in absurd, bureaucratic nightmares. Whether trapped in corporate jobs, oppressive governments, or inescapable red tape, people find in Catch 22 a reflection of their own struggles. But perhaps the most powerful thing about the novel is Yossarian's decision at the end. He chooses to escape, to reject the system, to live. And that is the ultimate act of rebellion. Heller's message is clear. Survival is not cowardice. Refusing to participate in insanity is not weakness. In a world that demands blind obedience, choosing to live on one's own terms is the greatest act of resistance. And so, as Yossarian disappears into the mountains, he leaves behind more than just the war. He leaves behind the idea that we must accept the madness of the world. And instead, he chooses something else. He chooses life.